9 p.m. on the East Coast, USA. I'm Ben Swan. Here are the stories we're following tonight. 4 more Americans are now dead. The war is only growing. Tonight, we break down the questions Washington still is not answering.
See, he knows how to get to me. He knows. He can have anything.
Plus, President Trump plays host to the president of Lebanon, all while a key question remains unanswered. When will Israel fully withdraw from that country? And finally, OpenAI is facing one of its most serious legal challenges yet, with claims that ChatGPT is responsible for a woman's death. On this show, we know you don't need more content, but you do need context. Anyone can tell you what's happening in the news, but tonight, we hope to help you understand why it's happening, how it's happening, and how it affects you. This is America Now. So much going on today, and we begin tonight with breaking news out of the Middle East. The United States and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia have now signed an historic nuclear deal. This is a 30-year, multi-billion-dollar deal that could lay the groundwork for Saudi Arabia to legally enrich uranium in the future. Of course, the irony here should not be lost on anyone. The United States actively engaged in a war right now with Iran over allegations of nuclear enrichment and pursuing nuclear weapons. At the same time, signing a deal to help Iran's neighbor potentially enrich uranium in the future. We're going to continue to follow the story for you and have the very latest as it develops. And also into the newsroom at this hour, the House has now passed the National Defense Authorization Act, approving a massive defense policy bill that supporters say strengthens U.S. military readiness and critics argue deepens military connections with Israel. The bill passed by a vote, very narrow here, 216 to 212. The legislation expands cooperation between the United States and Israel in areas including military technology, weapons development, and defense supply chains. Supporters say the provisions here will improve security coordinations between the U.S. and Israel, but opponents, they argue this bill moves the United States toward even closer military integration with that country. And now over to the war with Iran, because special emphasis is being placed tonight on the country of Jordan. The battles being fought in this war just got worse. And tonight, the White House story about this war just got really much harder to believe. The Pentagon has now confirmed a third American death from last week's attacks at the U.S. base in Jordan. 28-year-old Sergeant Angel Rampersad of New York was listed as missing. Tonight is believed to be dead. That makes three Americans killed in a single strike in Jordan. Add that to another service member who was killed just days ago in Iraq during the detonation of an Iranian drone. So now you have 4 dead Americans in just a matter of a few days. The total of U.S. military personnel who have been killed since this war began in February now stands at 18. 18 American families who will not see their loved ones come home. The president went to Dover Air Force Base today. You see the video here, to stand on the tarmac as the bodies of those service members came off the plane and back to U.S. soil. When a reporter asked him directly today about reports that Iran targeted the barracks where those soldiers were sleeping, here's what the president said.
All of them said very strongly, we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. They won't have a nuclear weapon. So we're going to honor them. And one of the hardest things to do, for me, it's one of the hardest things to do as a president. You know what?
Iran targeting barracks.
I don't know. Well, they're going to pay a big price.
Interesting. Notice he really did not answer the question. The reporter asked if Iran deliberately attacked a barracks full of sleeping American troops. The president's answer was, I don't know, and then a threat. And when another reporter pushed him on the fact that polling shows that right now most Americans are completely against this war, here's how the president responded to that.
But Americans are wrongly against this war. How do you ask that?
Well, Americans aren't against the war. A poll just came out. Americans don't want high gasoline prices, but they're not against the war. That just came out loud and clear in a poll. Nobody wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Do you want Iran to have a nuclear weapon? You think it's good?
Yeah, see, interesting statements there. That's not, by the way, what the polling says. The polling does not ask about gas prices. It asks if Americans want this war over now, not a victory, and into the war immediately. And the answer is overwhelmingly, yeah. Americans have hated this war from the jump. The President of the United States is standing on a tarmac holding 4 dead Americans and will not accept that the people of this nation do not want this war. In fact, he thinks everything is going well. Listen to him just moments ago.
If you combine us and Venezuela, we have about 62% of the world's oil market. So we don't need straits. We don't need anything. We don't need the Hormuz Strait, but we do it because we have to do it, because we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. It's very...
Everything's going fine. That's what the president says. But let's talk about Jordan and those Iranian strikes, because it appears like nothing is fine on that front. These strikes against Jordan do not appear to be random. You know, Jordan hosts some of the most critical U.S. air bases in the region. American forces and allied forces help to intercept missiles from those bases headed toward Israel. Well, basically, that means that the front line of America's air defense for the entire region is based in Jordan. And what analysts are noticing from these strike exchanges is that Iran isn't just lashing out randomly. They're being strategic. They're targeting interceptor systems, defense infrastructure, the things designed to degrade America's ability to protect over time. Meanwhile, what are we hitting? Well, by our own CENTCOM's description, military operation centers, logistics infrastructure, maritime capabilities, basically broad infrastructure targets. See, it looks like one side is playing chess, the other side is swinging a sledgehammer. You decide which approach looks more sustainable over the long run. We won't do that. But retired Colonel Douglas McGregor told us just last night something that more and more people are now being forced to confront. Listen to this.
And here's the other thing that people need to understand. International investors, the people that finance reconstruction and building, they're not coming back to do anything in the region right now. I read somewhere the other day, we're trying to build new pipelines to get around the Gulf. That's not true. That's absolute nonsense. No one will invest a dime in the region. The reason for that is not Iran. The reason for that is Donald Trump. He represents instability. He means endless war. The Israelis think that, at least the government thinks, that it's going to benefit from this. But what if we can't afford to bankroll them in perpetuity? What if we can no longer afford to provide them with all the missiles and the technology they need to defend themselves? We're going to reach that point at this rate if there's no slowdown. So I would argue it's Mr. Trump who's desperate. He's the one that wants a negotiation, but he has essentially destroyed his own position.
Yeah, so here's the reality here. We cannot keep the U.S. presence scattered across the Middle East anymore because it's now become just too dangerous. Every one of those U.S. bases is a target, and Jordan is the proof. So with all that on the table, the dead, the escalation, the dwindling of our own defense capabilities, what are our lawmakers focused on tonight? Well, not de-escalation, not an off-ramp. They are focused on paying for more. And that brings us to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's testimony on Capitol Hill, where he laid out the staggering new price tag for this war, asking for, brace yourself, $1.5 trillion. Because in his words, the conflict is different. Listen to how he framed it.
Project some remaking of a society in the image of America that spent thousands of lives. I mean, in Iraq, 15, I don't know the exact number, but tens of thousands between Iraq and Afghanistan, men and women lost. President Trump said we're not fighting stupid wars like that again. And he hasn't. That's why we haven't been trying to remake Iranian society, but simply in a realist, America first way, ensure they never have a path to a nuclear bomb, full stop.
I see what you're saying, but does it make sense? See, think about what he's actually saying. He's admitting out loud on the record that previous Middle East wars were stupid and pointless. By the way, totally agree. The same kind of wars that cost trillions and thousands and tens of thousands of American lives with nothing to show for it. Again, totally agree. Oh, and by the way, the House just passed an extra $95 billion for the Iran war, a tenth of our military budget, just like that. But Hegseth says this war, this one with Iran, is radically different. And that's where we totally disagree. Secretary Hegseth's pitch for why this one is different, well, he says he doesn't really actually say it all. He just repeats a slogan designed to make you stop asking questions. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. They didn't have one before, right? And now we need another $1.5 trillion to make sure they don't get one. And here's what should really bother you about this, right? Every signal out of Washington right now points toward escalation. not resolution, and nobody in this administration has explained what actually brings this war to an end. What is the objective? What does Iran on its knees actually look like? And how does burning through our own munitions and our own troops get us there? Because nobody seems willing to answer that.
Iran's in a lot of trouble. I mean, at the end of the day, they obviously don't have a free press that reports on for example, you guys will report on, the impact it's having on the U.S. economy and gas prices and this and that. They don't have that in Iran. But I can tell you they're facing hyperinflation, runaway inflation, high food costs. These are all pre-existing. They've all gotten worse. What you're seeing them use now, which is greatly diminished, is exactly the conventional shield that they were going to hide behind to pursue a nuclear program.
So that's Secretary of State Marco Rubio today repeating the same thing we've heard over and over. Iran cannot pursue a nuclear weapon. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, despite the fact that most accounts show Iran did not have a nuclear weapon program. Not just the weapon, but a program before this war started, and was not actively building anything before this all kicked off. That message might play well to a certain audience, right? But it's not landing with the majority of the American public. And the polling on this war proves it, no matter how many times the president or anyone on his staff denies it exists. And here's the part. Here is the part that should actually keep you up at night. Nothing about this war, literally nothing, the U.S. is doing right now in this active theater of war guarantees that Iran will not pursue a nuclear weapon, now or in the future. If anything, this conflict has produced a more hardline government in Tehran, the one more hardline certainly than the one that we started with, and one that has repeatedly said that it's done absorbing American aggression without response. But here's what Iran has actually learned from all this, okay? It's not about a bomb. They've actually learned they don't need one because they have something that analysts are now calling an economic nuclear weapon: control of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the single most important waterways on the planet. Every time a tanker gets hit, every time shipping lanes in that area are attacked and traffic drops at the Strait of Hormuz, Iran reminds the entire world that they hold the leverage. They hold the cards. And our own White House continues night after night to act like that leverage does not exist. Joining me now to discuss, we have Patrick Henningsen. He is the founder of the independent news website 21st Century Wire. Patrick, it's great to have you on.
Great to be with you, Ben.
Just a day ago, President Trump actually criticized Jordan, saying that essentially if the U.S. had been in charge, then those U.S. soldiers would not have died. I think a lot of people hearing those comments would say, if U.S. soldiers were not in Jordan in the first place, and certainly not in an active theater of war, they also would not have died. And so to immediately point the finger at Jordan to blame them, it seemed, maybe par for the course in this case, but also a little bit drastic, and not taking any responsibility for the fact that it's the U.S. that keeps escalating this thing instead of finding a way to walk it back.
Well, I think we have to be honest about the nature of the Kingdom of Jordan in the region. Its sole purpose is the joke in the region is that Jordan is an Israeli air defense battery with a country attached to it. That's its sole purpose, really. So if you look at that, you could say the same thing about a number of other positions, specifically around the Persian Gulf. So that's the nature of the issue. That's the truth of the issue, is that Israel has no strategic depth. And so the U.S. positioning around the region is to provide strategic depth for the state of Israel, America's greatest friend and ally. That's why they're there. It's not to protect the petrodollar or anything like that. That's the main reason. I could say the same thing about Djibouti. We could say the same thing about a dozen other bases in the region.
A lot of analysts, much smarter than I am, who I've been reading, who are talking about this, explain that the reason the Iranians are taking the tack that they are right now, and it seem to be strategically hitting so many U.S. air bases in Jordan right now and attacking those positions, is because they are clearing the field in the event of an attack on Israel directly, because this is where the interceptors would be. Is that correct?
Israel's air defenses that are located in all these different countries, and including U.S. naval assets, U.S. destroyers, whether they're loitering in the Red Sea, whether they're in the Gulf of Oman, whether they're in the Indian Ocean, they're there to shoot down Iranian projectiles. That's their number one goal, and we saw that. This isn't a theory. During Operation True Promise 1, 2, 3, and 4, you see all of these U.S. assets activated. And that's what they did. And that includes the U.S. naval assets in the Eastern Mediterranean, which which will be positioned there as well. And ditto for Cyprus and its role in signals communication and radar and so forth. So that's the size of this security envelope. If you think about it, it's massive. It's absolutely massive. The problem is Israel has dragged the United States into a hot war with the Islamic Republic of Iran, with the idea of the U.S. doing the heavy lifting.
The concept that there would be U.S. boots on the ground almost seems to be inevitable at this point, as wild as that is to me, that we would actually consider doing that, because they talk about this not being a needless forever war, and this is not going to be a long-term conflict. Boots on the ground becomes a very long-term conflict, and it seems like it becomes a very costly conflict. However, there are reports now that the Iranians have mobilized over 1 million citizens and armed them in anticipation for the U.S. attempting to put ground troops into Iran. Do you believe those reports are accurate? And what do you think a ground invasion by the U.S. looks like? It sounds like it would be very different than anything we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, look, Iran has enough mobilized forces, either in the IRGC or with the Iranian national military or the volunteer forces, the Basij forces, which exist in every single community, town, and village across the country. And the numbers for all of these ranks have gone up. The demand has gone up ever since the February 28th. So if the idea, Iran, the public doesn't need to be, prompted to mobilize. Everyone in Iran knows what to do. Everyone is stepping up. And in fact, if you want to look at the actual military forces in Iran, their ground forces are their most competent. Probably, we've talked about missiles and drones.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that. Their ground forces are more than competent, especially on their own territory. So they have special forces that are on par with Delta Force.
I can't believe we're doing this all over again. But Patrick Henningsen, we appreciate your insight. Great stuff. Thank you so much.
Yep. Great to be with you.
Thank you. Boy, it is a new era in Lebanon, according to Donald Trump. The U.S. president met with his Lebanese counterpart in Washington, D.C. today. The Israel-Lebanon ceasefire deal brokered by Washington was, of course, front and center. And while the IDF has pulled back from some of the settlements seized in recent months from its northern neighbor, when asked about a full withdrawal from the remaining occupied territory, Trump says that's a work in progress. RT's Steve Sweeney has more.
I think that Lebanon has been a very mistreated country for a long period of time. It's an amazing group of people, professors, doctors, lawyers, great intellects, and it's been hit hard for many, many decades, really. And we're going to have it properly treated and treated with respect that it deserves.
When the Israeli army withdraw from Lebanon, is there a clear timeline for that?
They're in the process of doing that. They're in the process of redeploying to other sections. And again, they get along very well. That was a great agreement they signed with Lebanon, and they're redeploying.
Well, this new era that was outlined by Trump in this visit by the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, the first president to make such a visit since 2009, well, it doesn't really tally with the facts on the ground. Of course, Israel still occupies large swathes of Lebanese territory, this so-called yellow line, which Netanyahu has detailed on a map, sits some 8 to 10 kilometers inside Lebanese sovereign territory. Now, one of the issues that has been raised within the so-called framework agreement is the withdrawal of Israeli soldiers from land that it occupies inside Lebanon. However, if you read the details outlined in that framework agreement, the trilateral agreement, of course, signed between Israel, Lebanon, and the United States, there isn't a timetable for withdrawal. What we have seen, however, is the two so-called pilot zones. These are areas that the Israeli army is saying it's withdrawing from, that it's never really established any kind of foothold in, or at least any permanent foothold. Now, again, these areas, they're not just random areas on a map, as some may seem, but they represent a corridor to the Ali al-Taher Hills. These are strategic heights that the Israelis have been battling for months to take control of. So far, they've been unable to do so. According to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, these are towns and villages that the Israeli army has assessed that they don't need. Let's take a listen to what he said.
We are allowing the Lebanese army to begin preparations for taking control of territory. We are establishing 2 pilot zones, both based on the recommendation of the IDF. The first is entirely outside the security zone and south of the Litani River. The second is north of the Litani. A small part of it is within the expanded security zone that we secured over the past 2 weeks, and which the IDF has made absolutely clear it does not need. In other words, we are maintaining the original security zone at all times. We are not allowing Hezbollah to enter there, nor civilians. That remains in place.
The Israeli army said that it was starting to withdraw from Zalta al-Ghabia. This is in Nabatea district. Now, this took place on Tuesday. There was a lot of hue and cry. There were media there, and the Lebanese army waited on the borders until it was safe to cross in. Now they entered the Zalta al-Ghabia, and they brought with them some construction vehicles. Now, as they entered that village, the Israeli army subsequently opened fire on them. They claimed that the Lebanese army had entered the so-called security zone. So they fired shots. They said that the shots were fired in the air. But the Lebanese army, in the meantime, said that these actions by the Israeli army could scupper that peace deal entirely.
While military units were carrying out deployment operation in the western town of Zalta al-Ghabia, Israeli occupation forces opened fire in the vicinity of these units. The army command has confirmed this aggression will obstruct deployment steps being taken in the experimental areas within the framework of communication with the Military Coordination Group for Lebanon, MCG4L.
Now, as the bombing continued across South Lebanon, the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun had the meeting in the White House with President Trump. Now it opened with which some people are calling a kind of fairly sycophantic speech from the President Joseph Aoun, in which he said he'd been very much looking forward to meeting Trump, describing him as a great president. And he did go on to praise the role of the Lebanese armed forces inside Lebanon, and he appealed to Trump for more support for the Lebanese armed forces, and of course that means financial support as well. The United States is one of the biggest backers of the Lebanese armed forces. Now, Trump, for his part, of course, he was very bombastic. He described Aoun as a great leader, and he could be one of the greatest leaders in the region, and he also offered his support should the president decide that he requires Trump's assistance, that he's very happy to speak to Hezbollah.
I would speak to Hezbollah, yeah. I speak to everybody. I'll speak to people that a lot of people think I shouldn't be speaking to, and things work out. I would speak to
Mr. President,
I would say this: if the president wanted me to speak to Hezbollah, he's lived with Hezbollah for a long time.
Now, it's not clear whether Trump's call would be reciprocated by Hezbollah, but Trump did then go on to say, after press questioning, that he once again mentioned the prospect of the Syrian president, Mohammed al-Jalani, Ahmed al-Shara, as he's now known, of his forces intervening in Lebanon to take on Hezbollah. This is something that he's repeated quite frequently over the past few weeks. Now, so far, Damascus has rejected that call, but if it were to happen, if the Syrian forces were to enter Lebanon, what we could see instead of peace in the region is further instability.
Well, artificial intelligence is no longer just writing emails or answering questions or generating photos. AI systems are now taking actions on their own. And when those actions cause real damage, the question is becoming impossible to ignore. Who is actually responsible? America Now's Olivia Flynn takes a closer look at the growing fight over AI accountability. Olivia.
Human accountability is a trait that can be questioned. Computers, not so much until now. AI can now write the code, make the decision, and in some cases, carry out action. But when that action goes wrong, our legal system still doesn't have a clear answer for who pays the price. This week, OpenAI said its AI models breached tech company Hugging Face's systems during a controlled cybersecurity test. The models escaped through third-party software, reaching a real company's infrastructure. OpenAI says the incident was contained, but called it unprecedented. Now, the bigger question, when AI acts beyond what its creators expected, who is responsible?
Well, that's a great question. Look, the way it's set up, I don't think we've answered that question. I think the courts are going to answer some of that question, but in terms of, morally, who should be responsible? Well, anytime you use technology, it is kind of buyer beware unless there's malice.
The courts are already starting to draw the lines. When AI causes harm, responsibility could fall on the company using it, the developer, or someone who misuses it. Lawsuits range from copyright disputes to claims that chatbots failed to respond safely during mental health crises. OpenAI disputes those allegations and says it continues to strengthen its safeguards.
We haven't actually decided what it means to build AI technology in service of humanity. Nobody's actually, convened a constitutional convention to basically put down the rules. What does it mean when you develop AI to do no harm? And Anthropic is trying to build its model around that somewhat. OpenAI, I think, is doing less so, although they're being dragged into that conversation.
Now, if we're really looking at this for the average American, this isn't just a Silicon Valley debate. AI could help decide whether you get a job, qualify for a loan, or what information you see. And at the same time, lawmakers are debating how much legal responsibility AI companies should have when things go wrong. Because when the decision has real consequences, there's still something AI can't provide: human judgment, empathy, and accountability.
We're going to see more mental health problems because of AI, because of the way it's programmed. And we really have to determine as a society, as a government, as a corporation, as people who are building companies, what does it mean to build AI in service of humanity? Because if we don't, then humanity will be in service of the AI, and that's a problem.
Whether you see AI as an opportunity or a risk, one thing is clear. A machine cannot feel the consequences of its decisions, but people can. AI is only as good as data, the rules, and the people who built it. So as these systems become more powerful, one question isn't whether they'll make mistakes. It's who will be held accountable when they do. For America Now, I'm Olivia Flynn.
Olivia, thank you for that. That is America Now for now. I'm Ben Swan. For more stories, visit our website, rt.com. And join us every night at 7, 8, 9, and 10 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for watching. Have a great night. And remember to question everything.